There comes a time in every believer's life when you must come to terms with the sacredness of silence. Not every detail of your journey is meant to be displayed on the world stage. Not every breakthrough, every battle, or every burden needs a microphone. God has a divine strategy for your life, and part of that strategy is knowing when to conceal what he's doing in you until it's strong enough to stand. We live in a culture that encourages constant exposure, but the Spirit calls us to consecration. He calls us to discretion, not as a form of fear, but as a form of spiritual wisdom and protection. You see, the enemy is always listening. He cannot read your mind, but he watches your patterns, listens to your words, and then plants confusion in the gaps you've carelessly left open. And sometimes it's not even the enemy, it's people. People who carry brokenness in their hearts, jealousy in their eyes, and gossip in their mouths. When you share prematurely what God is still developing, you invite opinions into a process that only heaven understands. You allow outsiders to contaminate what God was trying to cultivate in private. Some things are too holy to be handled by human hands. So I came to remind you, protect your oil, guard your garden, preserve your peace. Just because it feels good to talk doesn't mean it's good to tell. Your personal life is not public property. What God speaks to you in the secret place is meant to stay there until he decides to bring it forth. And when he does, there will be no doubt that it was him who did it. So today, let's learn why silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Why privacy is not pride, it's preservation. And why more than ever before, you must never feel guilty for guarding what is sacred. Some things are meant to be planted in private before they ever bloom in public. That's a spiritual truth often ignored in a world obsessed with visibility. We are being conditioned to believe that if it's not seen, it doesn't matter. That if it's not posted, it didn't happen. But heaven operates differently. God has always been in the business of working behind the scenes, away from applause, far from attention, in the quiet corners where no one sees but him. Think of how he formed the earth, void, formless, hidden in darkness, before he ever said, "Let there be light." Creation itself was first nurtured in the deep. There's a divine wisdom in understanding that some seasons of your life are seed seasons, not spotlight seasons. And when a seed is planted, it goes down, not up. It goes into the ground, hidden, buried, unnoticed. And yet in that hiddenness, it is being prepared for something greater than what the eye can see. What the world calls burial, God calls planting. But the problem is we get uncomfortable in the hidden space. We don't like the feeling of being unseen, unheard, unknown. So instead of letting God finish his work underground, we prematurely pull it up and try to present something that's still forming. That's when the trouble begins. See, there's a spiritual danger in exposure without maturity, in blooming before rooting. Because without roots, you can't stand. Without depth, you can't handle the weight of what's coming. And often, the very people who applauded you when you appeared will be the same ones who tear you down when you can't sustain what you revealed too soon. That's why God sometimes withholds visibility, not as a punishment, but as protection. He's not hiding you to harm you. He's hiding you to grow you. He's cultivating character in the dark so that when the light comes, you're not destroyed by it. Moses was hidden. David was overlooked. Esther was concealed. Even Jesus himself lived 30 years in the shadows before stepping into public ministry. What makes us think we don't need hidden seasons when the Savior of the world had one? He was growing in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and man, not on a platform, but in the privacy of a carpenter's home. And it was that hidden life that gave weight to his public ministry. We want resurrection, but we resist the tomb. We want promotion, but we despise the preparation. But you cannot have one without the other. God is not interested in rushed growth. He is not in a hurry like we are. He's not checking Instagram followers or YouTube views to determine your value. He's checking your foundation. He's testing your motives. He's watching to see if he can trust you with what you're asking for. And trust is built in the secret place. It's not built on stages. It's not built in popularity. It's built when no one is watching. When you worship him without a mic, when you serve him without a crowd, when you say yes in the dark, not because of applause, but because of obedience. There's a discipline in privacy, a strength in restraint. When you choose not to speak about something God is still developing, you're choosing to honor his process. And that honor opens doors that talent never could. It creates space for God to work without interruption. It says, Lord, I trust you more than I trust validation. And that kind of trust moves heaven. That kind of humility unlocks favor. But when you constantly put everything out in the open, your dreams, your plans, your relationships, you risk exposing it to people who don't have the spiritual maturity to carry it, or worse, people who seek to sabotage it. Some people can't handle your vision, not because they're bad, but because it wasn't given to them. It was given to you. And sometimes sharing what God gave you invites voices that contradict what he said. That's why it's wise to hold certain things close to your chest until the Spirit releases you to speak. There is timing to testimony. There is maturity in measured speech. Every thought is not meant to be expressed. Every detail is not meant to be known. Just because it's true doesn't mean it's time. Just because it's exciting doesn't mean it's public. Some things are so sacred that speaking too soon can disrupt the very blessing God is preparing. Have you ever noticed that some of your most powerful revelations come in moments of solitude? That clarity often arrives when you're quiet. That direction shows up in stillness. That's not coincidence. That's the rhythm of the Spirit. He moves best in the still places, and yet we often trade those sacred moments for the noise of public opinion. We ask people to confirm what only God can clarify. We post for affirmation when we should be praying for alignment. We talk too much and then wonder why confusion follows. But silence can be a weapon. It can be a shield. It can be the very tool God uses to guard what he's growing in you. Joseph made the mistake of sharing his dream too early, and though God used it for his glory, there was a price, a pit, a prison. All because he revealed something to brothers who didn't understand the weight of his calling. Now God redeemed it because he always does, but what if part of that pain could have been avoided with wisdom, with discretion, with spiritual sensitivity to timing? Not everything you've shown is meant to be spoken. Some revelations are meant to be prayed through, not posted about. Some visions are for your journal, not your timeline. God gives insight not for exposure, but for intimacy. When you begin to understand this, you stop feeling the pressure to be known. You stop rushing to prove yourself. You no longer chase visibility. You're content with being hidden because you recognize the hidden place is holy. It's where identity is shaped. It's where assignments are confirmed. It's where power is imparted. So while the world is busy building platforms, you build altars. While they're chasing likes, you chase his presence. And in due time, when the fruit is ready, when the roots are deep enough, when the oil is pure, God will bring you forth. And when he does, no one will be able to say it was man who made it happen. It will be undeniable that it was his hand on your life. Because what was planted in private will bloom with power in public. Not because you forced it, but because you trusted the process. Because you honored the season. Because you knew the difference between what's meant to be sown and what's meant to be shown. Oversharing invites interference into what God is still perfecting in silence. We live in an age where it feels natural, almost expected, to narrate every step of our journey. From the smallest accomplishments to the most intimate struggles, we've been taught that transparency is strength. But spiritual maturity teaches that discernment is strength. There is a line between vulnerability and exposure, and that line is often blurred when we confuse public expression with divine instruction. Just because you can share something doesn't mean you should. There is a difference between releasing a testimony after the test and narrating the test while you're still in it. One brings God glory. The other opens the door to confusion, opinions, and even spiritual warfare you were never meant to entertain. When God is still working on a part of your life, that space is under construction. And anyone who has ever walked through a construction zone knows it's not safe for visitors. There are tools lying around. Things are half finished. Some parts are dangerous. And most importantly, it's not ready for use yet. That's exactly what oversharing does. It invites people into a place that God hasn't completed, a place where the wiring is still being laid, the foundation is still being tested, the walls are still being built. But when you throw the door open prematurely, people start offering advice based on what they see, not knowing that what they're seeing is only part of the process. They begin speaking into a chapter that's still being written by the author of your life. And every voice you allow in has the power to influence your perspective if you're not spiritually grounded. Some things are so delicate in their formation that they require silence as a covering. Like a wound that needs to heal beneath the surface, like bread that needs to rise without disturbance, some areas of your life need to be left alone so God can work uninterrupted. He is the potter and we are the clay. Can you imagine the clay shouting to everyone what the potter is doing mid-sculpture? That would not only disrupt the shaping process, but it would invite spectators who don't understand the vision of the master's hand. And once you involve too many voices, confusion sets in, doubt creeps in, you start second guessing what you knew God told you in the secret place, because now you've got 10 different people telling you what they would do instead. There is spiritual weight to silence. There is a holy preservation in keeping certain parts of your walk between you and God until He releases you to share. Think about Mary, the mother of Jesus. The angel of the Lord gave her a word so heavy, so divine, so beyond human understanding. And the Bible says she pondered these things in her heart. She didn't run and tell the whole village. She didn't announce it on the rooftops. She didn't feel the need to explain what God was doing inside of her. She held it, she protected it, because some miracles grow better in silence. Oversharing often comes from a desire to be understood, to be affirmed, to be seen. But if your identity is anchored in God, then you won't need constant validation from others. You'll understand that their agreement is not a requirement for your assignment. Their understanding is not a prerequisite for your obedience. When you give people access to things they weren't anointed to steward, you give them the opportunity to mishandle what's sacred. And sometimes it's not even intentional. People may love you, but that doesn't mean they understand your calling. They may care for you deeply, but that doesn't mean they carry the capacity to speak into your destiny. Every person you confide in becomes a part of the atmosphere surrounding that area of your life. And if their spirit isn't right, their words, no matter how well-meaning, can become tainted. You might walk away from the conversation feeling more confused, more doubtful, or even ashamed of what God is trying to do through you. Why? Because you allowed interference where there was supposed to be intimacy. There is a sanctity to God's process, and part of honoring that process is knowing who to invite in, and more importantly, who to leave out. Sometimes what you think is harmless sharing is actually spiritual leakage. You're pouring out oil in places that weren't designed to receive it, and then you wonder why you feel drained, why your passion feels dimmed, why the peace you had about that thing suddenly feels clouded. It's because you shared what was holy with people who didn't have the reverence to handle it. Jesus said, "Do not cast your pearls before swine," not to insult others, but to warn you about the value of what you carry. Some things are too sacred to be handled by common hands. You have to recognize the difference between a sanctuary and a stage. Oversharing also robs you of the full revelation. There are times when God is revealing something layer by layer, piece by piece, and in those moments, it's not clarity He's asking from you, it's trust. He's not going to give you the full blueprint because He wants you to walk by faith. But the moment you start sharing too soon, you try to make sense of it all prematurely, you begin to force understanding where there should be surrender. And you can even sabotage what God was unfolding in the spirit by trying to explain it in the flesh. Not everything God says will make sense right away. Some words have to marinate, some visions have to mature. And when you're constantly explaining what God is doing before you fully understand it yourself, you dilute the potency of the word. People don't need to know everything. In fact, most of the time, they're not even listening for your good. They're listening out of curiosity, out of comparison, or even out of competition. That's why so many private conversations eventually become public rumors. You thought you were sharing with a friend, they saw it as information to pass along. You thought it was sacred, they treated it as casual. And once it's out, you can't control how it's handled. You can't contain the ripple effect. That's why discretion is protection. It guards your spirit. It protects your peace. It preserves the work that God is doing in you without contamination. There's a certain boldness in keeping quiet, a spiritual strength in not needing to be understood in the moment. It doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you're building. It means you trust God more than you trust man. And it means you're mature enough to let Him finish what He started without narrating every step. You're not ashamed of the process. You're just wise enough to know that divine construction happens best in silence, that God does some of His most powerful work in the secret place, away from the noise, away from the crowd, away from the eyes of those who wouldn't recognize His hand even if they saw it. Let them wonder, let them guess, let them ask. Because when God is ready to reveal it, He won't need your explanation to make it make sense. The fruit will speak for itself. The oil will testify. The glory will be undeniable. Until then, trust the silence, honor the privacy, and guard what God is still perfecting. The enemy exploits what you expose. Discretion is a form of spiritual warfare. One of the greatest deceptions in spiritual life is the assumption that because we have nothing to hide, we should have nothing to guard. But the truth is, not everything sacred is secret, and not everything visible is safe. The enemy is not omniscient. He doesn't know your thoughts, your plans, your prayers. But he does know your path. He observes, he studies, he listens. And when you talk too much, when you share too freely, when you lay your life out like an open book for anyone to read, you unknowingly hand him the script. You give him access to the very areas God is trying to develop in protected silence. Every time you speak about a promise God made you, every time you expose a vision that is still under construction, you risk inviting opposition that isn't from God. The enemy cannot attack what he cannot locate. He can't steal what he doesn't know you're carrying. But the moment you start broadcasting your next move, your inner healing, your spiritual plans, your relationship growth, you've just made yourself a target. And while the grace of God covers you, there is also a spiritual call to wisdom. Discretion is not fear, it is strategic warfare. It is choosing to be led by the Spirit and not by emotion. It is knowing the timing of a thing and refusing to reveal what God has not released. So many people confuse transparency with anointing. They think being real means being raw. Being vulnerable means being vocal, and being authentic means telling it all. But in spiritual warfare, your silence is sometimes your sharpest sword. You don't win battles by making announcements. You win by moving in obedience. You win by protecting what's precious. The enemy is cunning, and he will use the very things you say to twist, to torment, to tempt. If he can't stop the promise, he'll try to frustrate the process. He'll use people's words, people's doubts, people's opinions to plant seeds of uncertainty. And where confusion grows, faith diminishes. That's why discernment is everything. Not everyone who listens to you is for you. Some people are listening out of curiosity, not covenant. Some are silently rooting for your downfall while publicly clapping. And when you expose vulnerable areas, those places where God is still healing, still pruning, still planting, you allow spiritual interference to distract, delay, or derail what heaven was orchestrating in peace. Discretion is not about mistrust, it's about stewardship. It's understanding that your calling, your growth, your healing, your vision is valuable. And valuable things are never left out in the open. They're guarded, they're protected, they're hidden until a point. Jesus himself modeled this with brilliance. He often withdrew, he went to solitary places to pray. He didn't explain every miracle, every plan, every moment to his disciples. In fact, many times he healed people and instructed them not to tell anyone. Why? Because exposure can attract crowds that aren't sent by God. Not everyone who follows you is meant to walk with you. Some just want to watch you. Some want to report on you. And if Jesus, the Son of God, saw the need for discretion, who are we to think we don't need it? Even he refused to cast pearls before swine, not because he was arrogant, but because he was discerning. There's power in walking silently with God, in letting your footsteps be led, not your words be heard. Every time you resist the urge to explain, to defend, to reveal what's happening in your spirit, you create space for God to move without interference. Spiritual warfare is often less about casting out demons and more about keeping your mouth shut until the appointed time. It's knowing that a premature word can do damage that only delay and disappointment can heal. It's recognizing that what you share today could be used as a weapon against you tomorrow, not just by people, but by principalities. And yes, God fights your battles. Yes, his protection surrounds you, but he also expects you to use wisdom. Just like you wouldn't leave your home unlocked because you believe in angels, you shouldn't leave your spiritual life wide open just because you believe in grace. There are moments when silence is your shield. There are seasons when the less you say, the safer your soul. Not out of fear, but out of focus. Not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring the process God has you in. And the enemy hates when you do that. He hates when you guard your gates, when you refuse to give him intel, when you live with your ears open and your mouth closed. Every battle isn't fought with a sword. Some battles are won in stillness. When the enemy expects chaos but finds calm. When he anticipates drama but finds discipline. When he looks for a foothold in your words but finds nothing to grab onto. That's why he'll pressure you to speak, to vent, to prove, to explain. But silence can be thunder in the spirit realm. Quiet obedience can shout louder than any public announcement. When you walk in silence and alignment, you walk in authority. Because you're no longer feeding the opposition, you're starving it. When you practice discretion, you're not being secretive, you're being spiritually strategic. You are telling the enemy, you don't get access here. You don't get to play with my mind through their opinions. You don't get to twist my narrative through their projections. You don't get to weaponize my vulnerability because I won't hand it to you. I'll talk to God. I'll wait for his timing. I'll move when he says move, but I won't expose the work of his hands for the sake of temporary validation. Because I know that when he's finished, the fruit will speak for itself. There's also this: discretion protects your peace. It shields your mind from over-processing people's reactions. When you don't tell them, you don't need them to understand. When you don't announce it, you don't owe anyone an explanation. When you keep it between you and God, the only opinion that matters is his. That level of spiritual focus will frustrate the enemy every time. He thrives on distraction. He feeds on attention. But when you're silent, submitted, and spiritually alert, he loses ground before he can even strike because he doesn't know which area to attack. You've guarded your gates. You've sealed your spirit. You've covered your calling. In spiritual warfare, strategy is survival, discretion is defense. And the less he knows, the harder it is for him to aim. This isn't about fear. It's about fortification. It's about building a spiritual perimeter around what's holy. Your healing is holy. Your deliverance is holy. Your progress is holy. Your calling is holy. Why would you leave that uncovered? Why would you put that on display when it's still tender, still growing, still forming in the secret place? The enemy can't abort what he can't access. And access is granted by exposure. So be careful what you post. Be careful what you vent. Be careful who you confide in. The enemy is a legalist. He only operates within the access he's given. Don't give him the ammunition. Don't give him the outline. Let him be confused. Let him be frustrated. Let him wonder what God is doing in you. Because when the time is right, the glory will make it undeniable. But until then, discretion is your spiritual weapon. And silence is your protection. God honors the hidden seasons because protection often looks like privacy. It is in the hidden places that God does his deepest,